Hello and welcome to The World This Week with me, Jonathan Steele. This week we're focusing the programme on two places where religious and ethnic violence have collided. First, we'll be discussing the current situation in Nigeria. And stay tuned for the second half of the programme where we'll be explaining what may be the start of a new civil war in Iraq. But first to Nigeria, where a state of emergency has been declared as the government tries to wipe out Boko Haram, an insurgency by Islamic militants. Sectarian violence has engulfed parts of northern Nigeria for the past 4 years. But now the government has decided to try and root out the perpetrators once and for all. Here's Amanda Thomas Johnson with more.
Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan has declared a state of emergency in 3 northeastern states. The government claims that this is in order to root out Boko Haram, a group that has declared its opposition to the government and that has been responsible for many killings and bombings in the region since 2009. Some are worried that this troop surge may further inflame tensions between Boko Haram and the government. Though Boko Haram's attacks have been much publicized, government troops in the past have been accused by Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International and others of gross human rights violations. For instance, a military raid on Baga in April left 2,000 burnt homes and 183 bodies. There are growing fears for ordinary civilians and that this crisis may lead to a humanitarian catastrophe. According to the International Red Cross, 2,400 have already fled to neighbouring Niger, whilst parents have been afraid even to send their children to school. Some have pointed out the seeming perplexity of the government's stance on Boko Haram. Last month, it offered an amnesty for insurgents who were willing to lay down their arms, but this was followed by the announcement of a state of emergency. However, yesterday, the government offered an olive branch, stating that it will take steps to ensure that women and children it held on terrorism charges will be released from prison. Time will tell whether this carrot and stick approach will pay off, or whether it will only serve to fuel further violence. Amanda Thomas Johnson, The Islam Channel.
So are political factions based on ethnic and religious divisions involved in any way? And what impact might this conflict have on the wider West African region as a whole? I'm joined in the studio by Professor Murray Last, who teaches social anthropology at University College London, and Lagun Akinloye, who is works for the Nigeria Analyst at Think Africa Press. I'm also joined on Skype by Dr. Abdullahi Ahmed, Deputy Head of the UK Nigerian Muslim Forum. Welcome to the programme. Let me start with you, if I may, Professor Last. You've been visiting northern Nigeria regularly for decades. What is the basis for Boko Haram's following, and why have they become so strong in the last 4 years?
It started as a typical Jamaat al-Sunnah radical group, which eventually clashed with the police and then the army. And the army, well, the police in particular, did extrajudicial killings of their leader. In the long term, the current revolt is revenge on a government and a police force and an army that basically mistreated them. I think it is wrong now to treat them or to label them as terrorists. It's much more like a guerrilla war, and they are guerrillas and need to be fought in the way you would take on guerrillas. It is much more significant because basically they are enlarging their scope, they get people coming. Just one small point that might be important. The government has never acknowledged till now that they had arrested women and children as terrorists. Now they are offering an amnesty to the people they never admitted they had, but everyone knew they had. So it gives you a sense of the dimension that if the army and the police were arresting women and children, it's not surprising that one of Boko Haram's earliest demands was that at least their families should be let free.
Let me come on to you, Lagun. Yeah. Professor Last is talking about revenge on the army's and police's atrocities, which call for reprisals, as it were, by the people affected. But beyond that, is there sort of really a popular basis of support for these people in terms of their ideology and their political demands?
The ideology and the branch of Islam they represent has been denounced by political rulers from the north and the south. Christian, Muslim rulers have dissociated themselves with what Boko Haram actually want. They want a Nigeria under the banner of their radical Islam, which isn't somewhat foreseeable due to the different ethnic mixes of Nigeria, the political factions of Nigeria. It makes it very hard for people to actually follow through with what they believe in. The only reason why they have such mass support is with their group and in the town itself. As Professor Last said, their followers have been routinely killed, members of family, villages burnt down. And once you go through with such actions, then whatever they believe in will attract people who feel that the Nigerian government don't speak on their behalf. What they believe in cannot be taken up by the vast majority of Nigerians because they don't believe in that strain of Islam. But yet at the same time, because the Nigerian government had previously been heavy-handed to their owners and their previous rulers, over time they've amassed a following, sadly.
Dr. Ahmed, let me come to you, if I may. We've heard that a lot of it is to do with human rights abuses by the army and the police. So do you think the Nigerian government's declaration now of a state of emergency will make things even worse?
I think there is significant risk there because the attitude generally of the government and their forces and the lack of accountability when issues like this happen tend to show that there is no active interest in finding a reasonable solution to the problem apart from shedding blood. And I think, as all of the other guests have mentioned in a moment ago, I mean, there has been this belief that the government forces have killed more people, actually, have caused more loss of life than Boko Haram itself. So that can only tend to aggravate the problem and get people that are not actually members of Boko Haram begin to sympathize. I think in the next couple of weeks and months, I hope that the government forces and the government generally would have learned from some of the mistakes that they've made and perhaps change their rules of engagement and ways in which they identify and screen Boko Haram members, even if they want to put them in jail and so on. There has to be a judicial process of ensuring that. In the next couple of weeks or months, we will learn if the government forces are being looked at as protectors of the people or just thugs as the Boko Haram themselves are.
Well, I mean, that sounds important, but is it wishful thinking? Do you think there's any likelihood, Professor Last, that the government will, clean up its act, or the army will clean up its act and behave in a better way, and that the judicial processes will be followed rather than executions?
There's a real problem there. So my friends from Bornu and Yobe are telling me that the army is not seen and as a local force. They don't speak the local languages, either Kanuri or Hausa. Some of the soldiers have been heard to say, "Remember Biafra." Now, heaven forfend that the army splits, but once local people see the army as basically from another part of the country.
Well, and from another religion? Is the army, does it have a lot of Muslims in the army?
It used to have a lot, but what is happening is that my friends say most of the soldiers they encounter are Christians from the south, and some of them are ex-Igbo Biafran ones. I don't know how true this is, but it's a worrying development. And so you might not actually be able to treat the army as a united whole. They will say they are, but on the ground, in the front line, the question of who killed General Mohammed Shua is very problematic. People in Maiduguri say the people who killed him said they were revenge for Biafra. And once you get that, you're in real trouble.
Well, Lagun, do you think that the army can really make a difference with its new hardline policy?
I want to go back to the issue the Professor last just brought up now about the Christianization of Nigerian army. I think the army itself is still mixed with various tribes. I think over the years they've tried to blend them together for the one Nigeria aspect. Of course, if you station certain groups somewhere, you're not going to speak the indigenous language because Nigeria is a country of hundreds of different tribes, and they're in a place which is somewhat far away. Borno State borders on the northeast of the country. So if you place the army anywhere in Nigeria, you are bound to encounter different tribes and different people. The approach that they're having right now, me personally, I'm in support of it for the sheer reason that they are aware that they can't violate human rights like they've done on previous occasions. They are aware that the spotlight of the world and the media is currently on them. John Kerry, the US Secretary of State, previously made a comment that they must uphold the human rights while they're going through their operations. So they are aware that it's unlike before, where people are actually taking notice of how they're going about doing their business and conducting their stop and searches. They have a curfew in the majority of states. They've actually gone out their way to try and conduct this operation with Nigerian people in mind.
Dr. Ahmed, coming back to you, I mean, we've heard that the world and the media are watching the army and therefore they'll have to sort of improve their performance. But what about the Nigerian political parties? I mean, is it an issue that the opposition parties are saying that the army must be very careful, or is there kind of like a united political force behind this new hardline approach of having a state of emergency and really sending the army in a big way?
No, I think that there is a lot of criticism from the opposition parties against the ruling party at the moment. And I hope that that will continue because the government has been very, very relaxed. This problem of Boko Haram has been about for 4 years. Apart from all the atrocities that we've had, there was no consistent effort, integrated approach to finding a resolution to the problem. So unless there is a systematic pressure on the government from both the political party, the opposition political parties, as well as the local and international media, I don't think we're going to have a robust solution to the problem, which is what we need, basically, instead of thinking about crushing the Boko Haram. There needs to be a much more holistic approach to a resolution. I think there is always the danger of when opposition parties criticize the government, it will be looked at in a political lens. But that's their job. That's what they needed to do. The reason for them being in opposition is to hold the government feet to the fire in order to find a resolution. If they don't do that properly, then they would have failed in their responsibility to the people of Nigeria generally.
But I mean, with all problems of insurgency, as well as the ideology, there are often local grievances to do with socioeconomic factors, poverty or land reform issues and so on, exploitation one kind or another. I mean, does Boko Haram have any kind of socioeconomic platform or support based on the fact that those regions of Nigeria may feel they've been marginalized and neglected in the past?
I think one thing I know for sure is that the northeastern part of Nigeria is the most impoverished area in Nigeria, even before Boko Haram. And with this crisis, I think it has made things significantly worse. Apart from loss of life and property, there is significant diminished economic activity in the area, making things much worse. I'll give you an example of the village where I was born and grew up, where the 7 construction workers were kidnapped a couple of months ago. And my friends and family were telling me the impact of that on a small village, the loss of jobs by drivers, office workers, construction workers, loss of income from rental properties and things like that. So all of this combination and the general feeling of insecurity has made people have to stay put in one place instead of moving about as traders normally do, to buy products and things like that. So there is an underlying issue, I believe, that poverty is a big contributor. There is a feeling of basically despondency amongst the people. And some of those young people in Boko Haram may have felt so despondent that taking up arms against the government sounds not a bad idea anymore, apart from the fact that there is aspect of religious ideology. I strongly believe that there are issues of poverty that makes this violence a viable option for them to consider.
Well, let me come to you again, Professor Last. Do you agree with that poverty is a factor in this?
I'm sure a peripheral number of people are joining out of poverty because it's not a bad job if Boko Haram will pay you from the banks they've raided, from the kidnap ransoms they have got. But the core notion is almost certainly a religious one, which is perfectly legitimate in Islam, namely, how can we live and create a community that lives according to the way the Prophet and the Sunnah lived. But I think probably the most crucial thing that is happening now is that there's a vast exodus of people to get away from where the trouble is. Because if you imagine a curfew, a 24-hour curfew has been put on whole numbers of quarters of a town, probably the poorer parts. Okay, so how do you get water? You aren't allowed to go out. You don't have a well. You certainly don't have pipe. How do you get food? You certainly normally go out every day and earn a bit of cash and buy the food then that you can feed. How do you bury people? How do you get medicines? People don't have stocks that perhaps you have at home. So there's a very real point, and some friends who lived through a 24-hour curfew for a week long said it was just impossible. Mm-hmm. And so I think, in a sense, with the emergency followed by the curfew, you've got a real disenchantment at levels that probably you didn't necessarily have previously.
Well, Lagun, Akinloye, let me bring you on to the sort of wider issues of the whole West African region.
Okay.
I mean, how much influence is there, between Boko Haram and what's going on in Mali? Or we've heard that people from Libya even have come into the area and are helping them. I mean, is this actually happening, or is this a bit exaggerated by the media?
From what I've heard previously, and from news reports, from friends on the ground, and just the general consensus, Boko Haram have mingled with terrorist groups in Mali, Al-Qaeda of North Africa, and groups of that sort. They join each other in like training, meshing around of ideas, theories, ideology. They both see something in between themselves, which is a big cause to the Nigerian government. And they're trying to stomp this out via interlinking with other governments and sharing information, which wasn't done before, in which they discuss about the various issues in their own countries and try to see how they can curtail the advances of these terrorist groups. After the Baga situation recently, Nigeria, Chad, and Niger Republic created a joint task force, which is meant to further curtail the advances. It's the first time that these armies have got together to create a force to stomp out terrorist groups on their border, and they continue to act jointly and hope to include other countries such as Cameroon in the future.
Well, what about Western countries? I mean, France is very heavily engaged in Mali. The United States has surveillance planes help there and over Algeria, etc. Are they, French or the Americans, somehow involved behind the Nigerian government?
I think the Nigerian bravado is one that they think that they can deal with it on their own. But I do not doubt that they are receiving help from other countries. I hear that Israel provides somewhat of assistance. I know that America provides it. I know that Britain provides it. As to how much they provide, they prefer to keep that to a lesser extent. For the sheer reason that the Nigerian government feel that they can deal with this issue by themselves and have gone about it as the leader of the operations. Once you get other countries involved, in a way, it seems like to the people of Nigeria that the government has lost control over the situation. But obviously, they are receiving help and assistance in various technical ways, whether it's kitting up their anti-terrorist unit, and whether it's providing intelligence from satellites, X, Y, and Z. They are definitely receiving it.
Well, let me bring you in, Dr. Ahmed. We're getting close to the end of our program, but what do you feel about the Western involvement or Israeli involvement? Is that going to make things easier for Boko Haram in the sense of being able to say that the Nigerian government is just acting on behalf of sort of powerful governments to become a sort of puppet?
I fear that there can be an issue there. I think it can be a recruiting tool for Boko Haram, unfortunately. Even those that are not in Boko Haram will frown at the ideas of Western government and Israel contributing to that. But I think the Nigerian government has to get all the support that it needs in order to find a resolution to the problem. I don't think it's all the resolution will be found in the use of force only. There has to be a multifaceted approach to finding a resolution. And I think to go back a little bit on the regional issue, I think it's a significant problem with very porous borders across the whole of Western Africa. I think the mobility, if you use force simply as a solution, then some of these militants may just disperse across the region and cause problem in other countries. We just
well,
have
I think
issue.
On that note, I'm afraid we'll have to end. We're running out of time. So thank you very much indeed, Dr. Ahmed. Thank you, Lagun, Akinloye, and thank you, Professor Murray Last, for being with us. And stay with us. In the second half of the program, we'll be talking about the possibly impending civil war in Iraq.